The gun shook inches from his forehead, close enough that Marcus Reed could see his own reflection in the black metal. His living room, once warm with lamplight, and the smell of coffee, had turned into a cage of shouted commands and brittle hatred. The officer's finger tightened, his voice sharp with something uglier than fear. In that moment, Marcus understood how quickly a home could become a crime scene when Prejudice walked through the door wearing a badge. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're rewatching from. I love knowing who's listening. Marcus had come home late that evening, shoulders heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying secrets no one could see. He locked the door, leaned his forehead against it, and let out a breath he'd been holding all day. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Inside, the quiet felt earned. He kicked off his shoes, loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of water, unaware that this small ritual of peace was about to be shattered. The knock came hard, too hard. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, but a demand. Marcus froze. He checked the clock. Past midnight. Another knock. Louder. Voice barked his name like it had every right to be there. He opened the door a crack, chain still latched, confusion creasing his brow. The officer didn't introduce himself. He pushed the door, chain snapping taut, eyes scanning the apartment as if it already belonged to him. Accusations spilled out, noise, complaint, suspicious activity, refusal to comply, words piled so fast they barely made sense. Marcus felt his pulse climb. He spoke calmly, hands visible, explaining that he'd just arrived home. The officer didn't listen. He stepped inside anyway. That was when the gun came up. Marcus's mind raced, not with defiance, but with calculation. Every story he'd ever heard crowded his thoughts. Every warning whispered by parents, by friends, by history. His heart thudded against his ribs, loud as the rain outside. He thought of his mother's laugh, his sister's stubborn optimism, the promise he'd made to come home safe. He wondered if this would be the night those promises broke. The officer's face was red, jaw tight, eyes burning with a certainty that needed no proof. On the ground, he shouted, spittle flying. Marcus knelt slowly, the carpet rough against his knees. He felt dust float in the lamplight, caught between moments. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's door cracked open, then closed. Silence gathered, thick and watching. Marcus wanted to speak, to explain who he was, what he did. But he'd learned that explanations sometimes sounded like threats to men who didn't want their power questioned. So he waited. He breathed. He trusted a system he knew was flawed, because it was the only one standing between him and the floor. The officer's radio crackled. Backup was on the way. The gun didn't lower. Inside Marcus's chest, fear and resolve wrestled. He had sworn an oath years ago, one that demanded restraint, even when the world offered none. Being a federal agent wasn't a badge he wore on his sleeve. It was a responsibility he carried quietly. He had walked into danger before, stared down men far worse than this, but never like this. Never in his own home. The door burst open again as two more officers arrived, their boots tracking rainwater across the floor. They took in the scene, the kneeling man, the raised weapon, and hesitated. The room felt smaller with every breath. One officer asked a question. Another frowned. Marcus saw the flicker of doubt ripple through them, fragile but present. "Sir," Marcus said softly, choosing his moment like a careful step across thin ice. "I'm going to reach into my jacket, slowly. My identification is inside." The officer with the gun swore, muscles coiled. Time stretched. The rain paused as if listening. Marcus moved one hand an inch, then another, narrating every motion. His fingers brushed the leather wallet. He held it out, arm trembling, not with fear now, but with the weight of what this could become. When the badge flashed under the light, the room changed. It wasn't immediate. Confusion came first, then disbelief. One officer took the wallet, opened it, and went very still. He read again. His eyes lifted, meeting Marcus's with something like shame. The gun lowered an inch, then another. Radio calls followed, voices tight and formal. Names were checked, databases consulted. Confirmation arrived like a verdict. Marcus was who he said he was. Federal agent, cleared, authorized, innocent. The officer who had pointed the gun stepped back, color draining from his face. Apologies tumbled out, clumsy and late. Marcus stood, knees stiff, dignity intact by sheer will. He looked around his living room, his home now crowded with uniforms and regret. Outside neighbors had gathered, whispers buzzing like insects. Phones were raised, then lowered, unsure. When Marcus stepped into the hallway to breathe, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. A man nodded once, slowly. Truth had landed, heavy and undeniable. But the moment wasn't over. Dongwon Internal Affairs arrived before dawn. Statements were taken, body cameras reviewed. The officer's certainty unraveled under scrutiny, replaced by evidence and consequence. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, coffee gone cold, answering questions with the same calm he'd summoned on the floor. He wasn't angry, though he had every right to be. He was tired and determined. Days later, the department announced disciplinary action, training reviews, policy changes. The words felt small compared to the night that could have ended differently. Marcus returned to work, 2 cases that mattered, to the quiet heroism of prevention. He carried the memory with him not as a scar, but as a reminder. At a community meeting weeks later, Marcus stood before a room filled with faces, some wary, some hopeful. He spoke about accountability, about trust earned inch by inch. He didn't shame, he invited reflection. When he finished, the room was still.
Ow.
Then applause rose, hesitant at first, then strong. The officer wasn't there. Marcus walked home that night under a clear sky. He unlocked his door, stepped inside, and turned on the lamp. The light spread, gentle and familiar. He breathed easier than he had in weeks. The home was his again, 'cause justice isn't loud, it's precise, and it shows up when courage refuses to back down. And the place where fear once stood, trembling in the lamplight, became a quiet reminder that truth, when held steady, can turn a gunshot moment into a turning point. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. Subscribe to Cinematic Whispers for more human stories told with heart. And stay with us, because the next story might just change the way you see the world.